Accept the record button. Good morning and welcome to the Caregiver Teleconnection. My name is Glenda Rogers and I'm going to be your facilitator for today's session. Today we have with us Evalyn Greb, and she's one of our frequent presenters and also a facilitator on the Caregiver Teleconnection. And she's going to be talking about isolation, the curse of the caregiver. So Evalyn, for those of our participants that don't know you, could you tell them just a little bit about yourself and about your background?
Well, number one, I'm not as funny and interesting as Glenda. So I'll just start there.
We try.
I'm a licensed clinical social worker, have been for 50 years in San Diego, always worked with elderly and disabled persons and their caregivers. So I have learned many things over the years, and I continue to learn every time we get on one of these calls. And I'm so happy you're with us today.
Absolutely. So Evalyn, let's get started so we can share this information. I had said before we started the recording and earlier on when we were just chatting a little bit, that we hear about isolation over and over the years that we've been doing this, and what a horrible problem that it is. So I'm really glad that you're doing this topic today. So why do you think that caregivers are the one? You can see the questions I'll be bringing up with Evalyn, so you're not surprised at that. But why caregivers and why isolation in caregivers?
Well, caregivers can probably answer this as well as we can, and I'm going to ask them to participate in a little bit and let us know their opinions about this. But I believe they become isolated because they're nurturing people. As you said, you and I are caregivers by trade, by option, by what we want to do with our life. We want to help other people. It makes us feel good. It makes us fulfilled. So that's who caregivers are. You know, it's who you are. And then you care for someone that you love, that you want to take care of, that you don't want to see, have to go to a nursing home at least any sooner than they need to. And it's also where you do it. If you're in a rural area, it's real different than being in a big city where you can get more help. So it's kind of where you are and how much support you have or don't have. If the family is close by, you may have 5 or 6 brothers and sisters who help you out, and it's a little bit easier. But if you're the only one around and everything falls on you, it's a lot tougher for that caregiver than for many others. And it's also about your health condition. Many of us, and I'm an old, hair in my mouth, fans on. I'm an old hospital discharge planner. And I can tell you that we would discharge people who needed help at home, medical help, to their spouse who was in the mid-80s because there were no options. And that still happens. And so it has a lot to do with how old you are, what your health condition is, what kind of a facility or house you live in. Has it been adapted? So there's so many reasons why caregivers are more vulnerable, to isolation.
And we know now that caregivers over the years have had more and more responsibility placed on them. That doing things, and you've mentioned this in other presentations, doing things that they never thought they would have to do.
Absolutely.
So, absolutely. Well, so talk a little bit about isolation and what it really means so that people are clear what we're talking about today.
Well, it's very interesting to me that the National Academies of Sciences and Engineering, the Centers for Disease Control, AARP, many national organizations have begun to realize that isolation and loneliness are an epidemic right now. And they're often used in, kind of interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable according to the Center for Disease Control. Now, I'm not sure that we care that much about the differentiation, but the fact that they're a serious public health risk, they're the fact that they're an epidemic of their own, leads us to some realization about what we need to do now. So isolation is defined as a lack of social connection. And that affects some 25% of older adults. and can lead to loneliness. Now, loneliness is subjective. If what you want in a relationship, you may have a lot of friends, but not close friends, or you may have a lot of family, but you don't feel really engaged with them. So loneliness is if you have that subjective feeling of having relationships, but not really having what you want in a relationship. And I think that happens to caregivers a lot because they have so little time, to reach out and be social with the people that they do know and the people that are around them. So it's very interesting to me that these statistics, are real different than the general population, because the general population, even during COVID, 35% of all US adults reported loneliness. Now, 35% is a lot. Isolation of older adults is 25% or 43% if you're isolation and loneliness. But if you add those two together, you're talking about 68% of people who are older adults are either isolated or lonely.
Yeah, that's a huge number. Terry also mentioned in the chat box that having a full-time job and the distance away you are from the care receiver really affects, how involved you can be in other things. And so if you're going to a full-time job, then you're taking care of somebody, you don't have time to be involved with other people and reduce that isolation.
And many people have kids too.
They've got
a full-time job, they got kids, they've got a husband who's like a big another kid. Oh no, I didn't say that.
Sometimes it's true, but we won't say all.
I'm talking about my son-in-law.
Oh, there you go. And so using the term all.
Yeah, and I would say, right now I'm not talking about paid caregivers. And the reason is paid caregivers generally work in an office. So they don't get as isolated as people who are, taking care of someone who has in the stage dementia at home, who really can't leave. Oh, I wish I could get her to help me do my eyes. Look at that. So 40%, and this is new. This is really new. When I was, doing hospital social work, 25% of caregivers were men, 75% were women. Now it's 60% women and 40% men. And I think it has a lot to do with the millennials who are age 22 to 38, because they were raised by women who work. And when you're raised by a woman who works, you learn to do dishes, you learn to cook, you learn to iron, you learn to get yourself ready for school on time. And so they're used to doing some nurturing activities, to being self-supported and doing some nurturing and maybe even helping out with the chores so mom doesn't have such a hard job. One of the big issues that's really unaddressed in this country is rural adults. Now, if you live in a rural area where we know 35 million older adults live, and that is probably, that's a census number, so we don't know if that's a real number or not. I would venture to guess that it's underreported. I don't know if you agree with me, Glenda. And the problem with that is, in rural areas, there's so little support. And oftentimes people don't have family who live close by because they've moved away for many reasons. Most recently, I think those reasons are financial. Now, it's estimated that 53 million US adults are caregivers in the United States. And that's pretty interesting because there's that group of rural folks that we don't know about. So you have to add that percentage. And then there's also the uncounted and unsupported 8 to 18-year-olds. We know there's at least 1 million of them by the census report. And there's 1 million of those. How many million of the rural area do we need to add? How many million of the 8 to 18-year-olds do we not know about, are underreported? So we're talking about a lot of people who are caregiving. The estimate from AARP is 40% of older adults in the United States are caregivers. And that's one of the things we need to talk about when we think ask what to do about being isolated.
Well, I'm glad you're moving forward. For some reason, I'm frozen and all kinds of weird things are happening with Zoom.
I'm really missing you.
Well, I know I may have to log off again because my screen is just crazy looking. So go ahead and go forward with your presentation and talk about, what caregivers are doing and what causes isolation. So I will try and rejoin you as soon as I possibly can.
Okay. Well, they say that the average number of years that caregivers provide care is 4 years of their life. But we know, we have talked to so many people who've been doing it for 18, 20 years, or they've been doing it for one parent and then another parent dies, or a sister has MS and they're taking care of that person. So it can go on much longer than 4 years. The thing that caregivers do that's so different, especially as dependency progresses, is that they have to do everything twice. They don't go shopping for themselves. They go shopping, like your husband, who probably never went shopping, is now shopping for 2 people. And that's for older people, because now young men do shop. I see them all the time. But they do stuff, food prep, cleaning, bathing, taking care of another person, the medication management, the money management, driving to appointments, care planning, legal planning, keeping the family informed and supportive. And as Glenda was saying, if you've got somebody with a full-time job, if you have kids around, if you're, supporting the household, it's so burdensome to many caregivers. And caring for a person with dementia compounds that often difficult and multiple task list that I just talked about above. And so what causes isolation? I think the number one thing is a dependent care recipient. If you have someone at home that you can't leave and you can't afford to pay for respite, and you don't have family or friends to take care of that person, you become very isolated. And especially if you're in a rural area or suburbs or where you live far away from other people. So having a dependent care recipient is probably the number one reason that people get really isolated. Sometimes you live alone. If you live alone and your loved one is in the nursing home and all you're doing is going back and forth, from the nursing home to your house and being exhausted and trying to, feel good about the situation instead of feeling guilty and awful, about the conditions in the nursing home, then it's easy to get isolated and also to get really depressed. Loss of family and friends. So if you don't have those people around that you used to depend on, you depend on to talk to support you, to love you, to help you, to give you advice. If those folks aren't in your life anymore, if you've lost those, and we do as we get older, we continue to lose friends every year, then isolation is more probable. Chronic illness. In the month of June, I think I had 17 medical appointments. Luckily, a couple were physical therapy. But when you're so busy, as you get older, going to medical appointments, I had my cataract surgery done and, the stuff you need to do to take care of your body, so it ages well, or as well as you can have it age. All of that stuff takes a lot of time. And while that's happening, it's not only that you're getting all of these, aging related illnesses or diseases or problems, there's also sensory impairments that happen. Big one that we have heard about many times on these teleconnection calls is hearing. People who can't hear, oftentimes we don't know it. It's like a silent disease. So we can talk to them, they can shake their head because they're tired of saying, what'd you say? And it's true not just with the general population, it's true as we grow older and older, it's true with people with dementia, that hearing is the cause of much isolation because people just kind of close down. So the hearing aid issue is a very important one. And I think to date, we don't really have great hearing aids. From what I hear, I have maybe 10 friends with hearing aids or acquaintances. And even though they have a computer, a little app on their phone, it doesn't really matter. You can't black out all the background noise in a restaurant. You can try, but then you can hardly hear the people around you. I mean, they're just not great yet, but they're better than nothing. So if you know somebody who's, hard of hearing, but there's also other sensory impairments. Many people had COVID, can't smell anymore, can't taste things. So they don't want to go out to eat if somebody invites them. So again, it's that lack of socialization that we need to not get isolated that kind of goes down the drain. And many people, as they get older, lose their driver's license. And that is huge. That's probably the last big blow at independence for older adults. I think, in my opinion, it's the thing that we have to talk about all the time on here. We advise people, have the doctor do it, don't do it yourself, because it makes older people angry because they know that now they can't just get in the car and go where they want. Now they have to depend on somebody else. So it makes you totally dependent on someone else to get out into the world, to get socialized. Low income also, people who are in low income areas. I mean, we've had people on the phone who, they live in fenced yards with fenced front doors because their neighborhood's not safe. And they don't call an Uber because they can't afford it. And when they call the police in San Diego, I don't know about Texas or other places, but in San Diego, if you call the police, the only thing they're doing right now is just the most heinous crimes, because we don't have enough police. People don't want to be policemen anymore. Everybody is hurting for policemen, as we are for teachers. So low income puts people at risk of isolation. And the vulnerable and at risk, are the ones who are afraid to come out of their house, don't have money, sick, maybe agoraphobic, because it may be just that they're paranoid and don't want to come out of the house. But then how are they going to have any social interaction? Yeah, it's a tough one. Maybe folks could tell us other things that cause isolation, Linda.
Oh, that'd be great. I'm back with you. I'm sorry about that. Just difficult if it just froze and kicked me right out of the whole session. So what can you do about that? So does anybody else have some ideas about what causes isolation? I know that Evalyn gave us a good list here, but what else? What else could it be? And here in Texas, I can talk about, being isolated because of location. We have so many people that live in rural areas and there just aren't services and support. Neighbor might be 30 miles away. In fact, let me just say that's why we started the Caregiver Teleconnection, if you remember, Evalyn, is to reach people that were isolated and couldn't get out there and get to maybe conferences or other educational sessions.
Support groups, senior centers, respite, anything.
And the other thing that I think causes isolation, and maybe you mentioned this and I apologize, is lack of respite care. People can't get away to socialize because there's no one to take care of the care receiver, the person that they're taking care of. Anybody else has some ideas? Yes, I see that someone from area code 870 has, there they are. Please go ahead and speak up. Oh, maybe not. Maybe it was an accident. I don't know. Okay, I'm still having problems with the chat box. It takes over my whole screen for some crazy reason. Lynn says, when the person living with dementia doesn't want anyone else to know about their diagnosis, that's a good point. Rural services, Molly agreed with me. It's so hard when you're in rural areas. And Tina said, along with what you have said, due to the pandemic, your loved one has a compromised immune system and you don't want to risk it. Absolutely. Absolutely. The pandemic is not over. It's shifted and changed, morphed into something else, but it's still very much a problem.
Still nipping at our heels.
Nipping at our heels. Terry, you had something to share?
Yes, I was just going to share that having a full-time job hours away from care receivers is a tremendous, and working from home at that full-time job is tremendous isolation. You're either working or packing and getting on the road to spend a few days, like I am now, with care receivers. It's there's little downtime. There's no downtime.
Exactly.
So it's easy to get isolated. I mean, what do you do? When do you have socialization with your friends?
Rarely. On a few times that I am back in town, in my hometown, I might contact someone, but honestly, sometimes most of the time I just sink into the couch. You know, I just sink in with a book.
Yeah.
miss-
You probably go to sleep pretty quick when you're reading that book too. You're just exhausted.
Right. I miss a lot of social events.
Yeah. That's really tough, and a prime example of what we're talking about. Even when you have funding or grant, this is Tina, even when you have funding or grant funds or can locate those, but finding people to work because of the staff shortages. That's another good point.
Yep.
Yeah. And our families grow and caregivers get busier, it gets more difficult to keep up with socializing. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we don't have a magic wand for that, do we, Evalyn?
I don't.
No, I don't either. I wish we did. Well, thank you for your input. I really appreciate that. And the person on area code 870, if you have something to share with us, we'd love to hear from you. But your phone, it shows unmuted, but we can't hear you. So, shall we?
Sherry Schmidt has her hand up.
Yeah. So, my scenario, my mom, I'm the caregiver for my mother, and she wasn't a very outgoing social person before dementia took over. So she doesn't ever want to come along anywhere. So, and I can't leave her for extended periods of time. So I think another thing that causes isolation is, who that person was before dementia took over. If they were outgoing and had lots of hobbies and activities, versus like my mom, like she won't initiate a phone call. She expects other people to call her. She's always been that way. She won't go try new things. And so the isolation is really a heavy issue for us because I can't stop having a life, but I can't force her to do what she doesn't want to do. So I try to fit it in shorter time spans, and if I can get her to come out, she always enjoys herself, but it's a negotiation to get her to come because that's part of who she was before.
Yeah.
Will she accept respite?
Well, we have a second doctor's appointment this week for them to activate her POA, and then I can hire a nurse to come in for like a half a day every day to give her someone else besides me, and then I can focus on work and not have to worry about checking in to see how she's doing because she's alone when I'm at work. So
good for you.
But I have to wait for that POA process, and it's a long time overdue. But there's a lot of guilt that I feel with that as well, and nobody really.
Well, I want to tell you something. What we say to everybody
with other people because they either don't know what to do or they don't want to deal with it, and you don't want to be that Debbie Downer all the time, so you just withdraw and you deal with it.
Well, you're doing the right thing. Get yourself some help, get out, have some fun, share with people, and it's really okay to tell them, about your mom. You need at least one person that you can really, share that with, and who you feel is there for you and supports you. And whether that's a friend or your pastor or a therapist, whoever it is, You need somebody that you can really just download and vent
Yeah.
and talk about how you feel. So good for you. Get some time for yourself.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
I just wanted to put that out there to everybody to like put it in perspective. Like think about who who they were before dementia took over, because they're never going to be that, and they're never going to be different from their default. So you can't expect them to, magically just enjoy going to adult daycare because you take them there. If that wasn't something that they would have sought out on their own deep down, they're not going to enjoy it.
Well, those are really good comments. And I think it goes to a deeper pool of people too. People who have been chronic alcoholics, or who have paranoid personalities, or who have mental health problems like schizophrenia, who are afraid of other people or afraid of people to know them. So a lot of those folks get isolated, and their caregivers get isolated.
Exactly. Chris, I see that your hand is up. Let me go over here to the chat box for just a minute. Molly wanted you to know, Sherry, that you are not alone. You're doing great. Don't be afraid to share the weight. That is really some good.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And then Tina says sometimes it's where support groups can help. And I agree with that. This is kind of a mini support group we're doing right now. And it just helps you get through things. And then Rebecca says, the Alzheimer's Association has some great Zoom and in-person support. And I think, and you can maybe speak to this, Evalyn, support groups have taken leaps and bounds during COVID, because now they're more accessible. You don't have to be there in person. So I think there's a wider range that we can get to.
Not only the virtual support groups, but there's also a lot of chat rooms now, where people can go in and, put in your problem and say, has anybody had this? Can you help me figure this out? What should I do now? Or just to vent. It's a virtual support group. Just vent. Say, God, I'm so tired of this.
And when you're out in your community, if you just talk about caregiving, I think you'll be surprised at how many caregivers are out there that you didn't know were there, and you're very own. However you find that. Yeah. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
So I apologize in advance. I was unable to join right when the meeting started, but I just this maybe is not about isolation. It's my husband who's officially been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so it's been going on a while. I have to tell you, and I don't know, I need some feedback. What kind of, and he will not initiate a lot. He was a very social person, by the way, early on. And we've got lots of friends, but here's the deal. I don't understand why people don't communicate. He doesn't have a phone anymore, but oh my gosh, Rob's my best friend and blah, blah, blah. But no one texts me to say, hey, can I get together with Rob, or calls or emails. It's just, and I should let go of this, but this is so frustrating for me that he was there for so many people and like no one even reaches out. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize.
I don't. And then sometimes people go, well,
yeah, you don't need to apologize.
They don't know what to say or this or that. And then I get really kind of on my high horse and go, but guess what? It's not about them, on some
That's
level.
exactly right.
And
exactly.
so I'm just like, don't, it's just, I can't believe it. I'm just, and I have plenty of time. I can get out. Rob can stay by himself. I can do what I need to do and do what I need to do and spend a lot of time with him. And he's fine just by himself, just watching the world go by. But it just kind of frustrates me that, and I had this article that my daughter sent me that says friends disappear after Alzheimer's diagnosis. And it's really true.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know what, I just should let go of it, but it just really irritates, excuse me.
I think there are some things that you can do about.
I mean, what should I say something? I don't want to get in someone's face, but
I think it's about education. I think, the whole thing, you educate yourself. I'm sure you have. Alzheimer's.org has many fact sheets. Caregiver.org has many fact sheets. And they really talk about how you can entice people, to not be afraid to deal with a person with dementia, to not worry about saying the wrong thing.
Right.
I talked to somebody yesterday who said, yeah, you should never say, oh, do you remember when?
Yeah.
We're like, well, yeah, that may be intrusive to them because they don't remember when. But you can always say, do you remember when I did so-and-so and you were there and we had such a fun time? I wish we
Right.
could do that again.
Right.
There are ways to handle it that are good ways and fun ways and social ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you look over there at the chat box,
Okay.
you see that others are feeling the same thing that you are. So that should be a comfort. You're not the only one that's going through this. There are others.
Right. And maybe, yeah. Thank you to Molly. Yeah, you get angry. Yeah, no kidding. And people don't want to be around the negative. Okay. Yeah. I just,
It's hard.
I just don't, I personally don't think if I were, I would be there for my friends. I mean, just to check in, hey, how's it going? None of that. But anyway, thank you for your support.
Well, one more thing I would say to you, Chris, is, and I see, Angie, that you have your hand up. Maybe find one of our podcasts that speaks to some of the things you're going through, but also describes what dementia is like. And those people that are closest, I mean, just have a discussion group, if nothing else. I know that sounds ridiculous, but
No.
that's what comes to mind. Have a discussion group and look at one of the podcasts. I'm talking about maybe one or two people.
Right.
And so that they can become more educated, because education then reduces fear of being around that person.
It does.
Yeah.
And Glenda, I think this is the perfect time to tell people our scoop.
Oh, go ahead, have at it.
I don't know if any of you were on our podcast in June, which we tried to make a little bit more fun than professorial. And we started out with, we know that we're talking heads because we can see each other and we're talking, and we only let you talk sometimes. But Glenda did a great job and she actually made us talking potato heads. So we're going to be back. Now we're going to have a really good time. And let me tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about caregivers and the caregiving journey. And it's not about, how your patient feels or how your loved one feels, and how their journey is progressing and how you respond to it. It's about the potholes that caregivers run into. It's about the problems that you're going to have. And what we want to do is talk about it and try to get up in front of it so that you guys don't hit those potholes. So it'll be fun and we'll have a really good time. And we hope that you'll join us on December 6th. Put it on your calendar.
The Talking Potato Heads will be back. Okay, Angie, I've let you sit there long enough. Please go right ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm the caregiver and daughter of my 88-year-old mother. And I just wanted to add, with the isolation with my mother, the situation is all of her friends, they're all close in age. Her closest friends, they now have dementia.
Oh.
Some have moved away to live with their children because of their aging. Some have, lost their spouse, so they're now going through their own situation. So it's just, that's it. I mean, it's just very hard to find any network out of that isolation for her.
Yeah.
Well, what about you?
Mhm.
Yeah, of course, me. But, I'm thinking people around her age that they can talk, things that I wouldn't know. But unfortunately, there's none that exists right now.
Got to find you some social interaction.
Yes.
Some way or other, and we talk about respite a lot, and it's easy to say and hard to find in many instances, and hard to fund in many instances.
Glenda, I
Yeah,
love all,
yeah.
all of this, all the input here and the questions and everything, but I think maybe we should move along so we can just leave time at the end for everybody else's questions.
That's good. So let's talk about the vulnerability of caregivers then. We've heard it in person.
Yes, we sure did. And
Talked
I'm
about
only,
a lot of it.
and I'm only going to take one off of this page.
Okay.
One of the things that's happened to caregivers, and you mentioned it a little bit, is the fact that they're doing so many medical jobs right now. And it's things like medication management, equipment manipulation. And we're not just talking pushing a wheelchair or showing somebody how to use a walker. We're talking people who go home with the Hoyer lift.
Mhm.
We're talking people who have to take blood samples for diabetics. I mean, we're talking, you used to have to go to a nursing home for that or a clinic. You know, these are medical events. And to have responsibility for that is one of the things that I think puts a lot of neighbors and friends. It's like, oh, well, when are you taking blood? I don't want to come over then. Or when do they have to go to the bathroom? Because I don't want to come over, you know, when you're transferring them, you know, from the bed to the wheelchair. I mean, some of those things that feel like, you know, you don't want to invite people over because you know you're going to have to do those things. So it affects you as a caregiver. And also the whole issue of ageism, functional disability that you might have already had, you know, it all adds up. Like everybody's talking about, there's so much, there's the burden is so great, you know, that you have got to take care of yourself first. That is our number one message. So.
All right. That's the one you wanted off there?
No, I can go on a little bit.
Okay.
I think COVID, COVID made it a little worse. This is May 2020, so it's a long time ago, but I'm not sure, you know, they probably don't have these same feelings right now, but what they do have is fear. They have a lot of fear about, well, I want to go out, I want to eat in a restaurant. They don't have outside seating, but it's the only restaurant in town. I have a friend who lives in Las Vegas. They have no outside restaurants, you know, basically too hot. They have none of those little sprinklers up on top, you know, so people have fear about the fear and depression because they're worried about getting some COVID and what it's going to do to them. And what half the population almost hasn't been, you know, it doesn't have shots yet. So it's a big thing to worry about. And they have all of the anxiety about, you know, especially if someone is in a wheelchair, on a walker, is going on those medical trips, is getting, you know, is having hospitalizations. What's going to happen when they get home? Are they coming home? Are they going to need placement? And COVID made it worse. Somebody already mentioned, because of, you know, if you want to get a caregiver into your home to provide respite, how do you know, do you have to ask for their booster record? You know, how do you do that in a way that's not impolite or rude? And so people have kind of lost access to home-based services for a while. And I think they're not real comfortable yet. So that when you get to the point where you feel like you're alone in the world, no one cares, you're isolated, you're trying to take care of someone, no one's helping you, you don't know where to turn. And we don't like that. We don't like that level of isolation.
Absolutely.
The
Okay.
absence.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what the effects are and why it's important to address it.
Sorry, Glenn.
Oh, go ahead.
The absence of human contact is associated with declines in cognitive function. This is the National Institute of Engineering, Medicine, and whatever the third thing is. Anyway, it's big think tank in Washington, D.C. And now they're looking at this because they say, okay, if it's decline in cognitive function, most caregivers know about that. It's a brain-based skill that's needed to acquire knowledge, to manipulate information, and to be able to reason. Now, the biggest study that I read, and you're just not going to believe this, but it can actually change brain chemicals and cause inflammatory processes. It can not only decrease cognitive function, but here's this study. It looked at people who had been in isolated lockdown cells in jails for a period of time. And what the result was these people had lost their ability, their cognitive ability to really manipulate information, to have judgment, to acquire new knowledge, to acquire friendships, to know how to reach out to people. I mean, that's how bad isolation is. It can affect your brain so that you can no longer do those things. So we don't want you to have that. Okay.
No, go right ahead.
Okay.
Continuing on with what you were talking about.
The Centers for Disease Control says isolation and loneliness are a public health epidemic. And the risks include, we're talking stuff here we're talking deadly, premature death, as in obesity, smoking, and inactivity. So all of those, people who died because of getting COVID because they were overweight, or because they had bad lungs from smoking, or because they were so overweight and inactive that they also had high blood pressure or heart disease. Those were the people who were vulnerable. So isolation makes you vulnerable. And it's a 50% increase in the risk of Alzheimer's for people who have that kind of isolation and loneliness. 30% increase of heart disease and stroke, higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. And one of the things that we know from AARP is that over the lifetime of a caregiver, 67% of you will suffer from depression at some point. And that's part of why we need to not get isolated, not let ourselves go into that cycle of downward depression. It also increases your risk of chronic illness and their severity. And, it all has to do with your immune system. When you laugh, when you share something with a friend, when you see something funny, when you take a walk, when you're active, your immune system gets bolstered. The bad cortisol goes down, all the good stuff, comes back up. So those are the chemicals that we want in our brain. We don't want all of this, this stuff that's taking us down, down, down. The guy who's the head of, anyway, Dr. So-and-so at UCLA, Dr. Cole says that isolation and loneliness, I just love this quote, act as a fertilizer for other diseases. So it's like throwing fertilizer on any of the little problems that you might already have in your body that are going to grow bigger and can take you out. So that's why we're harping on this, why I'm harping on it. The Family Caregivers Association says that people gain weight due to emotional eating. Their blood pressure increases due to the stress, and that, of course, increases the risk of diabetes, stroke, and death. The National Institute for Mental Health says depression increases if you are lonely or isolated, have a family history for depression, misuse alcohol or drugs, which many isolated people do. And that's the way they salve themselves is, I'm going to get a little bit high. And, many older people now, we're part of the hippie generation. You see many of them smoking weed. You see many of them, taking drugs like they did their entire life. And it's gotten to be a bigger and bigger problem. And also people who've had stressful life events get isolated because they think people, don't want to be with them. If you've had a divorce or you've lost a spouse, some people, feel like that's socially uncomfortable. You're no longer invited to your friend's house that are couples. You're alone. So, you don't, they want to do things in couples. They need two people to go to dinner with, not one person. So it gets lonely. And if you're caring for someone with chronic illness, it's easy to get depressed. It's easy to be home and be sad and be guilty and have all those feelings we've talked about over time.
Okay, my favorite slide.
I know. Had to get to this one.
Absolutely. I believe in taking action, and she's going to help us figure out how.
Well, we've talked somewhat about it already, you know, reaching out and connecting with others. It's really hard to make time to do that. It's really hard to make it a priority. So many people have told us, well, when am I supposed to do that? I go to bed every night and I feel like I haven't done enough. You know, the list is still there. There's still 6 things on the list I didn't get done today. And you know what? The top of the list should have been something for you. Either your exercise or your walk or reading or meditating or deep breathing or yoga, whatever works for you needs to be at the top of the list. And it needs to be the first thing that you prioritize. And you may need to get out of bed and help somebody to the bathroom. Well, then put them back to bed for a while and take care of yourself. And you have to be compassionate with yourself and kind to yourself. So many people spend all of their compassion and their love and their thoughtfulness on the care recipient. But you need to do it for you first. And the more you do it for you, the easier it'll be to do it for them, because that's just the way life goes. So the other thing you need to do, like I was saying, you've got this list of things, you got to track your thoughts and manage them. You know, maybe if you journal, and a lot of people that we've talked to actually do journal about their caregiver journey. And the good part of that is that you can really figure out and go back and look at what worked and what didn't work, at what you were doing to yourself or not doing for yourself, and figure out how to make a change that will help you be healthier and will help you maintain your ability to do caregiving. And then change your focus. You know, you've got to get out, walk and read and do all those things, and maybe exercise. I know I have a 93-year-old friend who exercises on Zoom, and he's in a facility.
Yeah, whatever works.
That's right, whatever works.
That's right.
And I have other ideas, and we're going to ask for, you know, hopefully other people have ideas too. You know, the virtual support groups we talked about, so important to stay healthy. I can't tell you how many people we know who take care of their loved ones so well. Every doctor, every dentist appointment, taking care of every medication, but they don't do that for themselves. You know, go to the dentist. Women don't get their mammograms. You know, they don't get their physical appointment. They don't, you know, people need to get their checkups. You need to sleep well. You need to do relaxation techniques. And if you're not sleeping well, there's a lot of help for that online right now. There's a national sleep organization that you can do a sleep study. You know, and it really gives you hints about how to get better sleep, because sometimes, like, especially when we didn't get everything done on that list, people lay awake thinking about it. And their suggestion is a parking lot. You know, have a parking lot list next to your bed, and don't think about it, you know, until the next morning or until after you've taken care of yourself the next morning. And of course, you have to know the signs and symptoms of depression. And we've talked about that many times. You know, you gain weight or lose weight, you can't sleep or you sleep too much. You have totally lost interest in the things that you used to love to do. You're cranky, you're sad, you're crying at the drop of a pin. You know, don't let yourself go into that cycle, that downward cycle of depression. Get some help. And you can get it anywhere. Your doctor, your primary care doctor, oftentimes though, they don't take the time to really help you, rather than give you, you know, some numbers. And we've had a conversation about this. The online therapies, some of them are good and some of them are really drug bins. Some of them are trying to get you hooked on opioids. So you need to be really careful about the online therapies. But ask your doc, your church, any home and community-based care worker, any therapist, your local area agency on aging, which we always refer to, and Glenda used to be the queen of her area agency on aging. And that's where you can get respite care and legal services and caregiver support services and information, you know, so that AAA is a little gold mine of services and information, you know, to get to other places. And so you are going to get all of these resources. I don't really think I need to talk about any of them. the one that I would encourage you to talk, if you're rural, if you're isolated, if you can't get out to any senior center or support group, use the virtual Alzheimer's.org to find support groups or get information for your friends about, what dementia does and how to socialize with somebody who's in early stage dementia. And then there's Alzheimer's Connected, alzconnected.org, which is their chat room that they just put up about a year ago. Seems to be going really well. So you can also always call 211 in your local area, or the elder care locator, which is like 211 for the aging community in the entire United States. And Glenda, with that, I think I'll shut up.
No, you are not. There has been just a lot of chatter over here in the chat box that has been so wonderful, and you've been presenting and I've been reading it, and some wonderful supportive messages to each other. It just fills me up for sure. So Angie talks about keeping a journal, and she says that's an excellent way to release those negative feelings, and how true that is. And Betty was talking about what it is to be a friend, and I guess this goes back to Sherry some. When you've lost those friends, then if you identify what you need in a friend, maybe you reach out in any way that you can to make a new connection. And that could be through virtual or in person. And I have to say personally, I'm a widowed person. I have been for many years, and I fight isolation all the time. And it's not the same. I'm not a caregiver anymore, but it's something I work at. And I guess that's my message to you. It does take work not to be isolated. And when you're caregiving, you just don't have energy to do that. But I encourage you to look for different ways. Look for something totally different.
I heard you cheat at cards.
I do not cheat at cards. But you may get a laugh out of this. I've wanted to travel now that COVID has morphed into something else and something less, hurtful. But I want to travel some, but I don't have anybody to travel with, and so that's one of those isolation things that I'm fighting right now and trying to find a travel buddy. And it's funny. I never thought I'd be in that position, and I'm sure you caregivers feel the same way. You never thought you'd be isolated, that you were always out there, having friends and connections, and then all of a sudden it's gone away. And I felt the same way. So I can relate to you on that level. And I was a caregiver for my husband before he passed away, so I understand that too. Terry said,
let me add one thing to that, Glenda. Make young friends too. We need young friends. So they don't, because most of our friends are going to die right around the same time we do. We don't have people that
talking about that, the person that she's caring for. All of those friends are getting older, and it's true, and I am too. But see, here we go. This is a support group just right here online. I love wellbeats.com. I've never heard of wellbeats.com, and she thinks that it's available. Yoga sessions, workouts, meditation are all available there. And then I got some advice. There are solo travel groups that offer a lot of advice, and I'm going to check into that for sure. I do want to mention what's coming up on the Caregiver Teleconnection, and I'm excited about the December 6th date, so I hope you'll put that on your calendar, and we'll try and have some fun with a really serious topic. Tomorrow, and that's Wednesday at 10 o'clock Central Time, there's a session called Using a Positive Approach, and this is part 2. I assume that part 1 happened last month with Sherry Fairman, and she's going to be talking about trying to look at dementia in a little different way. So I applaud her at that. And are you back with Lucy on Thursday, Evalyn?
I'm telling you, I'm going to be with Sherry tomorrow, and I did her first one.
Oh, good.
And she speaks in a way that you will never forget. She said when she goes into the room of a person with dementia, she gets down to their level. She touches their arm. She looks in their eyes and she says, "Hi, my name is Sherry Fairman. Who are you?"
Wow.
And it's like, it's this real thing that we were so excited about it. They actually asked to have her come back again.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So
And then
I'll
are
be,
you with Lucy on Thursday?
yep.
No, back to back. So Lucy's going to be talking about, let me see, the signs of paranoia, hallucinations, and delusional behavior. So that should be an interesting session.
It is, because they're very confusing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Trying to keep which one it is that you're actually observing so that you can report to the physician, you know, what's happening actually. So I'm glad she's doing that session. Well, we've kind of come to the end of our time together, and I'm sad about that. This was a wonderful session today with a lot of comments and questions, and I just love that when we can have that conversation. I know Evalyn does too.
Thank you all so much for your participation. It just makes everything so much richer and better and more important, especially to other caregivers, because what happens to you could happen to them.
And so we're here for you, but remember, you're here for each other. And Sherry, you're not the only caregiver out there that's experiencing that. And to others of you that have had so graciously shared your individual situation, thank you so much. It helps us. It helps your fellow caregivers. It makes us all stronger. It educates us. So please join us again on future sessions. We look forward to seeing you then and hearing you then and talking with you, not at you, not the talking heads, but participating with you.
Okay, but we're talking potato heads, so it's more fun.
Yes, but we're partners in this, and so let's keep it that way. I loved the session today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Evalyn, for being with us today and sharing the information. Now, I'm looking forward to talking to you again soon too. So bye-bye, everyone. Please stay safe and healthy and take care of yourself. Take your own oxygen first. That's the message.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.